Hey, aloha, everybody. This is Coffee with the Coach, and this is our 83rd edition. We are back in London, UK, and we are coming to you live. And this is our Black Monday special edition show because, man, oh man, has it been a crazy weekend and an even crazier Monday, Black Monday in the National Football League. I want to bring on a really good friend of the show, a really good friend of mine, and a great journalist, and maybe one of the biggest Cowboy fans this side of the continental divide, and that's Richard Graves. Come on in, Rich.
Hey, Jeff, how's things? Good to see you. First question first, though. I've been with everybody else on Twitter this weekend. We know you flew in after a mammoth flight from Hawaii, but your bags didn't travel with you. Have they arrived?
I'm going to just say this. I think Neil Reynolds was behind it all some way. But yes, I got back from the show last night and my bags were there. So finally, I do have more than, one pair of underwear, 2 T-shirts. So people can be around me. Social distancing was not a problem because I've been wearing the same clothes for 4 days. And so everybody was glad to stay away from me. My man, let's talk quickly about them boys. How about those Cowboys?
Well, how about them Cowboys? Back in the postseason for the first time in 3 years. But I've got to tell you, Jeff, we were talking just before we went live here. They've got the 49ers next week on Sunday night, UK time. It's an historic matchup, historic rivalry. You go back through the 90s and the Jimmy Johnson era, the early 80s, and the catch. Right through the history of the NFL, the 49ers and the boys somehow entwined in the greatest postseason moments. And I really think this Sunday night, it's going to be another matchup for the ages. I think it'll be close. I don't think there'll be more than one score in it. And you look at the odds makers and they have Dallas as 3-point favorites. That tells me it's a coin flip game. And I think they've probably got it right.
I'm going to tell you something, man. Jesse Sapolo is a very good friend of mine. And I'm going to try and get Jess on the show, our pre-playoff show, our wildcard weekend show. And, Richard, you're exactly right. You talk to him about those, Niner Cowboy rivalry games and the back and forth, Kenny Norton going to both teams, Deion Sanders playing for both teams, how much Bill Walsh really wanted to beat Jimmy Johnson and the Cowboys. I mean, it was a personal rivalry, unlike many in pro sports. In pro sports, guys compete extremely hard because they're ultra level, competitive alpha males. But there's usually not kind of true animosity in the exchange. But I'm gonna tell you something. Between the Cowboys and the Niners in the 80s, it was hatred. It wasn't animosity. It was hatred.
Yeah, and that was built as well going into the 90s because these were essentially the two best sides in the NFL at the time. When they met in the playoffs, it was almost the de facto Super Bowl, wasn't it? And that rivalry was intensified because players switched between the two teams, the likes of the great Charles Haley, Deion Sanders in the mid-90s, Ken Norton Jr. as well. And these are two franchises that ultimately got used to winning Lombardi trophies. And they knew that if they beat the other one, then they had a good chance of claiming another trophy. And because their standard was that high, the respect and the rivalry was also right up there and elevated as well. Now, it's been a long time since these two teams have met in a meaningful postseason game, but I think there's a sense as well that because of that, it means something more, and especially the way the Niners got into the postseason last night by going down to their NFC West rivals at the home of Super Bowl 56 and getting the job done. They didn't have to rely on results elsewhere. They got the job done themselves. So who knows? It's going to be a good one for sure.
I think it's going to be a great one. And hey, fans out there that are watching this show, wherever you're watching it, from Hawaii to Istanbul, it doesn't matter. You can get in with us live on this show and ask a question. If you connect to YouTube, your take, your hot take, your rant, your question will come up live right on the screen and we'll get to it. Richard, I want to talk about something that I'm going to crank that hype machine up a little bit right now. And let's get to this matchup. Dan Quinn and Shanahan. Now, Shanny was the offensive coordinator in Atlanta when Quinn got them to the Super Bowl and they couldn't close it out. These two guys have worked together. They know each other extremely well. I thought Shanahan, this is my personal take, pencil whipped, and I mean pencil whipped Raheem Morris in the second half of that game. How do you think that matchup's going to go? Dan Quinn against Shanahan.
Well, I've got to tell you, I think it's one of the intriguing stories leading up to next weekend's game, Jeff, because you go all the way back to when Dan Quinn was appointed the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, having had this success with the Seahawks. And even before that appointment was made, if you believe the stories that go with it, Kyle Shanahan was on the coaching staff in Cleveland at the time, and he openly lobbied to get himself out of that contract because he wants to work with Dan Quinn. He said at the time that Dan Quinn's defense was the one defensive system that had him a little perplexed. He wants to work with this guy that had formed the basis of this defensive system so he could understand it and work out the nuances so that he could better adapt his offense to be able to break it down. Now, they had that successful year, of course, in Atlanta. We were there in Houston for Super Bowl 51, and the game was won 28-3, and you look back at it, and you say, why did you not continue to run the ball? You opened the door for the Patriots to turn it around, and, well, it's the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history, wasn't it? And you'd think that maybe you'd learn from that. But again, you and I, Jeff, were in Miami 2 years ago.
Yep.
And the 49ers banging control of that Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs late into the fourth quarter. And I remember they still had a one-score lead, and you've got Jimmy Garoppolo trying to throw the ball, and there was a 3-and-out inside a minute, I think it was. The Chiefs get the ball back, bang, bang, they score, and they go on to win it. So I have got to ask the question, has Kyle Shanahan learned from those experiences? What I saw last night against the LA Rams, especially in the second half, when they almost exclusively dedicated the offensive game to the run, to hold. There was 17 points down in that game last night, and they come all the way back, and then Jimmy Garoppolo has that fantastic 2-minute offense in operation to tie up the game and take it into overtime. That was a better offensive performance from the 49ers. And when I say that I'm really not sure about this game on Sunday night, if you see the 49ers offense operate in that fashion, I think they can go to Dallas and win this game. If they put it exclusively in the hands of Jimmy Garoppolo and get away from the run game, I think this Dallas defensive front feasts on the 49ers. That's one of the intriguing matchups going into this game, and it's one that I'm eagerly looking forward to.
You know, it's amazing to me. That's why when I talk about being pencil whipped, I'm watching this second half of the game, and I'm going to give some credit to John Lynch and what they've done in terms of putting a roster together in San Francisco. You got some guys on that San Francisco roster. I'm talking about Juszczyk. I'm talking about Kittle. I'm talking about Deebo Samuel. I'm talking about guys that have multiple position flexibility. But you look at the Cowboys and you look at a guy like Parsons and you see the exact same thing. But the Rams, for all their superstars, and you're talking about Floyd, you're talking about Donald, you're talking about Miller, you're talking about Ramsey. I mean, you got 4 of the best at their position in the league, and you can't stop. I mean, you can't stop them. I mean, you can't get stops. They have the game in control. And in coaching, we talk, Richard, about winning the middle 6. And the middle 6 is the last 3 minutes of the first half, the first 3 minutes of the second half. And when they let San Francisco in and get a field goal at the end of the half, they opened the game for them to win the middle 6. And they came out, and what did they do with their first drive in the second half? And it was almost, if you're going to play the Niners, you better make 10 beat you with his arm, not Deebo Samuel, and no way. I agree with you. If they can make San Francisco's offensive lineman pass block, they got a chance against that Dallas front. But if they just let them pin their, like last night, where they're just sitting in 7-man boxes and they just get pounded and pounded and pounded, they will run for 250 yards against the Cowboys. But again, I just cannot believe that Dan Quinn's going to let that happen.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you, Jeff. The strength of the 49ers offense is the run game. We saw it 2 years ago in the NFC Championship game when they just... Did Jimmy Garoppolo only throw the ball 10 times in that game, if memory serves me correctly? And they just ran it down the Packers' throats. What we saw in the second half of last night's game was the 49ers say, right, we are going to run this ball. And for all the star power that you've just mentioned on that Rams defensive side of the ball, they couldn't do a thing about it. They couldn't stop them. And Deebo Samuel is a fascinating player because you get him in space, he makes players miss, he makes plays. And he was exhausted, physically exhausted at the end of that game towards overtime because he was the man, and going back to that Super Bowl in which they lost to the Chiefs, it was all about George Kittle, wasn't it? Well, Kittle's still part of the offense. It's just that there are a few extra pieces now if they can work out how to utilize them to the maximum effect. There are problems. You can talk about the great job, and it is a great job Dan Quinn's done with that Dallas defense and Randy Gregory, DeMarcus Lawrence, Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs. But there are players that can match up going into this game. And it's a case of who's going to turn up on the night. This is what playoff football's about, essentially, isn't it? I put my set against your set. Who can scheme it better? Who can come out on top? And it all, like you say, throws into what's been a fantastic rivalry down the years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Black Monday because it's our Black Monday show. And I wanted to get your takes because I have a tremendous amount of respect for you as a football guy, a guy that really understands and gets the game. There's an awful lot of talk right now about Brian Flores and kind of to the general public being blindsided by getting whacked today in Miami. What's your take on that, Richard?
I've got to tell you, I thought it was the shock announcement of the day. Having delved a little bit deeper into the situation, I don't think it was as much of a surprise to people in that South Florida area. There appears to have been murmurings beneath the surface that Brian Flores and general manager Chris Greer haven't really seen eye to eye for a month or more now as it is. But look, Brian Flores, regardless of the fact they went 1-7 to open the season, he engineered a 7-game winning streak in the second half of the season. Put it into perspective, there's never been a head coach in the history of the NFL that has put a streak together like that in the second half of the season that has then been fired following the close of the regular season. 24-25 was his record overall across his 3-year tenure, but he's 19-14 over the last 2 years. I think you're seeing progression there. And you have to go back 2 decades to find the last time the Dolphins put together back-to-back winning seasons, which is what they've done now over the last 2 years. I've got to tell you, Jeff, I find it a head scratcher. I think you did see progress under Brian Flores in the Dolphins. Of course, in the background, there's been all this constant chatter about whether Tua Tagovailoa is the quarterback going forward for them. Are they interested in trading for Deshaun Watson? Again, some of the talk is that Brian Flores was the reason Deshaun Watson was so keen on moving to Miami in the first place. Stephen Ross is the owner of the Dolphins. He's been a hugely successful man in the business world, but as yet, he hasn't delivered that success down in Miami. And I think, given you've now pulled the trigger on this move and made it, you better get this next appointment right because the pressure's on now.
Well, let me say this, all right? And I've been doing this in pro sports for 30 years, so I can read the tea leaves pretty well, I think. When there was so much public speculation about Deshaun Watson, that was the first time the alarm bells went off in my head. Because as an organization, if you truly have faith in the guy that you took with the 5th pick of the draft and you feel he is the future of your franchise, that never gets in the paper. I mean, you can kick the tires on a player, and you have to do that because that's your job. But to openly come out and say that we're interested or whatever, you have to understand what that does to the guy that may be the guy you got to rely on to win games for you for the next few years. So that one was a strange one to me. And then I look at 3 offensive coordinators, 3 offensive line coaches in 3 years. That also is a head scratcher to me. So somewhere in there, there's dysfunction. And whether that dysfunction was between Greer and Flores, which I understand there was more than a little. And one of the things that was factored into this decision that they made today was that there was disagreement between the two men about coaching staff, who was going to be on the staff going forward. You look at that staff has gone through a tremendous amount of change in 3 years. And continuity is important, right? Especially for young players. So whether that was pushback from Flores or pushback from Greer, somewhere they weren't on the same page. And I think it just got to be a point where they said, hey, we got to go a different route. We're just not going to get on the same page. And let me just throw this out to the speculation guys. And I think it's really interesting to think about, because we get caught up in like the immediate news of the day. Let's look at a pattern here, right? Like it's like we're trying to catch a serial killer, right? We got to look at the pattern. Okay. Fortress Patriot is where everybody seems to want to go to find, how are they doing it? Let's get somebody from there. Let's bring in a general manager from there. Let's bring in a head coach from there. Let's bring in, let's get we want a little bit of that Patriot magic. And if you look at the success rate of the guys who've come out of there, Richard, and I'm talking about head coaches, general managers, personnel guys, all of it, it's not very good at all. And I mean at all. Because you can go, there's a laundry list of assistant coaches at the Patriots that may have flirted a little bit with success at once. I mean, almost every single one of them has done like they got right to the point where it looked like they were going to be really good. And then all of a sudden it fell apart on them and they were fired, right? I think there's a lesson in this as we get into hiring and firing. Unless you're willing to put together the same environment that Bill Belichick has in New England, then don't expect to bring Bill Belichick's guys and have it turn out like he has it in New England. Because in New England, the owner writes checks. And yes, he does. He has input. Yes, he does. But there's one guy that you have to please in that organization. One, right? And there's no divide. Why does he hire young coaches that basically come out of where? Josh McDaniels come out of Division III football. Dave Patricia, Division III football. They're guys that don't have great backgrounds. They're very intelligent people because he's going to teach them what they need to know. And he's interested in one way, and that's the Patriot way. Right?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Jeff. You've mentioned Matt Patricia there. Obviously, Brian Flores hasn't worked out down at Miami. Josh McDaniels went to Denver and then went back to New England. For whatever reason, it just doesn't work. And I noticed on the feed with viewers interacting here, David Wallace has just come up with a point I was going to make. You look at the Sean McVay coaching tree now over at the LA Rams, and people that have worked with him. Matt LaFleur goes to the Green Bay Packers and just reels off 13-3 seasons as if it's nothing new to anybody. Then you've got Zach Taylor and the job that he's doing up at Cincinnati. 2 years ago, I can remember the Bengals being in the UK and playing a game, and they're going through a torrid time. And the thing that impressed me was, even in the face of all that adversity, he was adamant that we have got a plan. It will bring success. It is going to take time. And he's gone through a couple of years where, let's be honest, people begin to doubt him at the end of last year. And now he's got his pieces together. He's got his franchise quarterback. They've hit on the draft with Jamar Chase as well, amongst others. And they're back in the postseason. So it's intriguing. People keep going to this Bill Belichick well because he's had so much success up in Foxborough, New England. but for whatever reason, it hasn't translated into success from that coaching tree. Conversely, you look at the job Sean McVay's done with the Rams. Okay, he hasn't had a Lombardi trophy yet, but he got them to the Super Bowl, and now people that have worked with him are proven to be successful elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's to think that you're going to go to a place that's successful, and this is one of the pitfalls of the NFL, because it's a copycat league in every way, in personnel, in coaching, in hiring, in all of it. You know, I'm a Gus Bradley fan and I'm a Dan Quinn fan. Where did they come from? They came from Pete Carroll's family tree or coaching tree when Pete Carroll was winning Super Bowls. And both of those guys flirted with success, but couldn't get it over the hump, right? So that's why this hiring thing is so unique and so interesting, because right now, you know, we talk about who's going to get hired there and who's going to get hired here and what do they need here and what do they need there. And there's so much that plays into it. It's such a layered thing. You look at Jacksonville, right? They go out and they get convinced that Urban Meyer, because he's had success at Florida and he's had success at Ohio State at the highest level, he's going to come in and be the answer. And it was a complete flame out. I mean, a complete flame out that, again, will set the franchise back years. Now, where do you go from there?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I noticed last weekend that they put in a request to speak to both Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator in Dallas, and Dan Quinn. Kellen Moore took that Zoom call. Dan Quinn decided not to. But equally, I understand why teams are interested in Kellen Moore, because he's young and it's the number one ranked offense in the NFL. And look what Sean McVay and Cliff Kingsbury are doing elsewhere. But I'm bound to ask the question, at what point do you start looking experienced veteran coaches like Eric Bieniemy up in Kansas City, whose name keeps getting bandied around, but as yet he's still to be given the reins at a franchise, like Byron Leftwich, who's done ever so well down in Tampa. These guys have now got skins on the wall, and at some point, somebody, if you're serious about being successful, has surely got to give one of these guys a chance. You can't go with the shiniest toy just because it's the in vogue thing. Because I think what we've seen time and time again is that it very rarely actually pays off.
Well, I think you're right, and I'm gonna throw another name out there, and I think, and we're talking speculation, you know, and so let's speculate. If I'm in Jacksonville, I've got a young quarterback that, particularly in the last game of the year, showed me that there's something there, right? Now, I'm not ready to anoint him yet because he's got a lot to grow and a lot to learn. But there's some, you know, that Jacksonville team, I mean, handled Indianapolis in a game that Indianapolis had to win. And most of Jacksonville's, quote, stars weren't in the game, weren't playing. So you look at that and you say, that's attractive to me a little bit. But you need, in my opinion, a steady hand, a veteran hand, a guy that's been through it, a guy that understands, and a guy that's used to being in an organization where you don't have everything, right? And there's a guy sitting out there right now that is unemployed, that has won in college football at a place where you can't, they say you can't win, Wake Forest University. And then he goes to the Detroit Lions, and in modern Lion history, he's the only coach to leave the Lions with a winning record, and that's Jim Caldwell. And you tell me why he can't get a job in this league.
I don't know, is the short answer. I thought he got the rough end of the stick the last time he held a head coaching position in the NFL, when again, he was basically tasked with putting together pieces without having all the assets at his disposal. You talk about his time at the Detroit Lions. I think that was a change made because people felt it was time for a change, not because he'd done anything wrong. Far from it, he got them to the postseason. But for, I will say it, a questionable call in Dallas, they progress to the next phase of the playoffs back in 2014. So I think Caldwell's as good a shout as anyone. As you say, you're working with with a core squad that's a young squad, talented squad, a quarterback that's still learning the game. And oh, by the way, the Jags hold the number 1 overall pick in this upcoming April draft, when if early predictions to anything to go by, they could have their pick of a defensive pass rusher to complement Josh Allen as well. And that's a fairly ferocious prospect if you put all those pieces together and make it start humming.
Well, and again, I grew up a Lions fan, right? So I got a place in my heart for them a little bit. But I just, if they would get to the postseason, as bad as it's been in Detroit for the last 6 or 8 years, if they would get to the postseason, they'd cancel school for a week in Michigan. I swear to God, the kids wouldn't go to school for a week. They'd have a state celebration. It might become a state holiday if they got to the postseason. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. You mentioned some young guys that I think I agree with you. Got to get an opportunity. Have proven everything that you can prove as an assistant, and all you got to do now is just make that jump. But making that jump is, because I'm a guy that did it before I was ready for it and didn't have the support system around me to help me through my mistakes. And, if you go into that environment, you fail, you may never get another chance. So as you talk about Eric and you talk about Byron Leftwich and you talk about Kellen Moore, it's really, really important that those guys not only get an opportunity, but they get an opportunity where they have a chance to succeed.
Yeah, and that's why I like Eric Bieniemy up in Kansas City as well. I know that Andy Reid has a heavy input into what happens with that offense, but Eric Bieniemy's worked successfully with Patrick Mahomes. They've won a Super Bowl together. They've gone to another Super Bowl together, and they're slap bang in the middle of the race for Super Bowl 56 as well. He's proven that with young, inexperienced talent around him, he can mold an offense and make it work. He can basically bring the best out of talented players with plenty of potential. And you look at the situation you've got down in Jacksonville, and this is why it's so mind-boggling that Urban Meyer wasn't able to make it work. Not able to make it. He absolutely destroyed it. This is somebody that's meant to have all the experience in the world, been incredibly successful through the collegiate system, and somehow managed to do what everybody else in the world thought was impossible, and that's make a mess of it in Jacksonville. So for me, Eric Bieniemy would be a great fit. And I also think for Jags owner Shad Khan as well, this is a big moment for him because he has given so much to the city of Jacksonville. But for the first time over this last week, you've begun to hear murmurings of discontent amongst the Jags fan base. And they were going to, well, they did bear that out yesterday, coming dressed in clowns outfits. And then the irony, of course, was you've got a load of clowns dressed up in the stands, all celebrating as the Jags are pulling off the most unlikeliest of results.
Well, Richard, I tell you what, man, it's always a tremendous, tremendous thrill to have you on the show. You always bring in the heat 24/7, hot takes. You know what you're talking about. I really encourage people, let our viewers and listeners know, because we get guys from all over the world listening to this thing, where they can get your takes and where they can hear your podcast and hear your work.
Well, I'm on Twitter at Richard Graves1, but we have a weekly podcast now, Graves on Gridiron, that we put out. And through the course of the season, we've taken 3 games from each weekend slate and then judged them against the line. Been very successful along the way, 31-23 on the season. But now we're going to switch that up. Go big or go home. Isn't that what you say, Jeff? So instead of just taking 3 games through the playoffs, we'll look at every game in the playoffs and delve a little bit deeper into them. And let's see if we can have a bit more success. So Graves on Gridiron is the podcast. It's out pretty much every Friday morning ahead of the games. And we have a bit of fun with it as well.
Richard, thank you very much. We'll get you back on real soon.
Pleasure as always, Jeff. Glad you got your suitcases. It's great to see you on UK TV again as well.
All right, my brother. Take care. All right. That's Richard Graves again. Graves on Gridiron. Make sure you check him out. Man, he's that good picking games. I better call him every week because I didn't do that good picking games this year against my man Neil Reynolds. Michael, come on out here. Are you there, Mike? There we are.
I'm here.
Magic Mike. How did you get through the weekend, man?
Man, I'm not on IR, but let's just say there's a few things going on. What a week! Just first off, Richard, that was great to hear, Richard. I'm really enjoying that podcast as well. So check that out. And thanks to Richard for coming on. He came on a short notice as well. So thank you, Richard. Yeah, great week. I mean, Jesus, Jeff. I mean, where do we start here? Like, I mean, what a weekend.
Okay, now because this is the Black Monday special, right? And I know that you are a deeply invested Bronco fan. And I need your take as a Bronco fan, because I talked to Nick Ferguson earlier in the day, right? And he has been doing cartwheels since Fangio got fired, right? And Nick Ferguson, for those of you who haven't watched the show all the time, Nick is a friend of our show. He played for me. He spent 9 years with the Broncos, Pro Bowl alternate at safety, and then finished an 11-year career down with the Texans with Kubiak down there. He does radio in Denver. He's most listened to talk radio show in Denver, and a really interesting personality if you're a Bronco fan, because he is very, very, let me just say, he's real. He's real with how he feels. And he has been calling for Fangio to get it. And he has been calling for, Shermer to go right out the door with him. He got his wish this weekend. Mike, tell me, as a Broncos fan, as a member of Orange Nation, what do you think?
Orange Nation. Okay. Look, our guest Column's here to talk about it as well, but I'll just quickly say that I think it's fantastic. It's probably the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time. And Pat Shermer's gone as well. So if this team gets an owner, they're only about 4 or 5 years and a quarterback away. So finally, look, it's good to see a bit of decision making happen, and then also for it to happen lunchtime our time on Sunday was excellent before the game started, and good to see a bit of accounting and ownership taking place at the team. But Column's here to talk a bit about Fangio, and also for people on the chat. I know Jeff will spend time at the end getting through everyone's questions because there's loads, so definitely
this is, like I say, this is our live show. This is one of the ones we do where we have the opportunity to take questions. I'm going to stay here past normal time because we want to interact. This is a fan show. Colin, come on out here, man. I got to talk to you about Black Monday in the National Football League.
Colin Cronin on the way.
You with us, Colin? There he is. What's up, man?
How's it going, Jeff? Good to chat to you.
It's going awesome. I gotta get your take on the Broncos and the move with Vic Fangio. How do you feel about it? And was it justified or no?
It was justified. You don't want to see anyone lose their job ever, Jeff. But realistically, it's a results business. I think Vic Fangio is a fantastic defensive coordinator. He is a brilliant defensive mind. He can scheme. He can, cause confusion in opposing QBs. But a head coach is required to, not just be a defensive coordinator. You've got to look at both sides of the ball. And ultimately, 3 losing seasons, a record where I think he was .388 was what I saw. It was time for the Broncos and Vic Fangio to part ways. I have no doubt Vic Fangio will get a job. He will be a defensive coordinator in this league before the end of the month, perhaps even before the end of the week, Jeff. But as a head coach of the Denver Broncos, it just didn't work.
All right. Now, so for fans around the world that haven't had a lot of history with Colin. Colin is one of the panelists on one of the best shows, one of the best podcasts about the NFL that I've had an opportunity to be on, and I really recommend it highly. It's the Irish NFL show, 4 lads from Ireland that chop it up every week, and they are tuned in. I mean, these guys are vested in the game. They're tuned in. They make trips across the pond to go, do live reports from the NFL games. They really, really do a great job. And as a Bronco fan, right, where do we go from here, right? And let me just say this. I'm looking at an offensive line that I thought the other day played extremely well. Muti was playing guard for Reisner, and I thought he hung in there really, really well. Garrett Bowles only had one holding call, which is like, that's a revelation, right? So I look at that offensive line, I say they're good enough. And I look at Noah Fant and I say he's good enough. And then I look out there and I see Cortland Sutton and I say, yeah, he's good enough. And Jerry Jeudy, yeah, he's good enough. And KJ Hamler's hurt, but I've seen enough of KJ Hamler to make me believe he's good enough. He's got that wow factor as a wide receiver. And then you go over to the defensive side of the ball, and their secondary was chewed up. But, you know, Simmons doesn't make the Pro Bowl, which is the greatest heist of, I mean, that's a rob job. I mean, that's criminal that kid didn't make the Pro Bowl. And they got a bunch of street free agents that are playing out their skin on the defensive line. This is a pretty daggone good football team, but they got to find a quarterback, Colin.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the reality, Jeff. And Kyle Brandt from Good Morning Football gave his thoughts earlier today about the Broncos head coaching job. He said that it was the most terrifying job on offer, because he said you're facing a decade against Mahomes and against Herbert, and there's absolutely no QB in the building. He said it's not exactly a robust QB draft or a free agency class. What's the plan? And that's exactly it. I mean, ultimately, when it comes down to it, for sustained success as a head coach, you got to have elite QB play. That's realistic. You can get by for a year. You can get by for 2 years. I mean, Sean Payton, what a job he has done with the Saints this year, given the QB problems that they have. He will now have Trevor Siemian starting a playoff game for the Saints. Mike Tomlin has done a phenomenal job with the Steelers and nursing Ben through this last season. Ben is no longer the force that he was. But ultimately, both of those guys had Big Ben in his prime, or Drew Brees. Belichick had Brady, and so on and so on. So you've got to have the QB in place. It's going to be really interesting to see what the Broncos do in terms of, do they stick or twist? Do they look to bring somebody in? There's talk, Jeff, that, you know, this isn't a particularly strong draft class. Now, what's interesting to me as a Broncos fan, and I've been watching the Broncos for 30 years, the most successful QBs the Broncos have ever had, John Elway, Peyton Manning. Both of those went number 1 overall in the draft. Arrived in Denver through different routes, but the Broncos have never taken a QB in the top 10 in the draft. Now, drafting in the top 10 doesn't guarantee success, but it makes it a damn sight easier to build around a guy and to at least give yourself a chance of him being your franchise guy if you take him. But the Broncos have never done it.
Well, you know, I understand how important that elite quarterback is. I agree with that 100%. But I also believe that when you talk about those other teams, when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers and you look at the New Orleans Saints and you look at the teams that, quote, got to the playoffs without an elite level quarterback, they were elite in some other area, right? So, for example, Pittsburgh defense, the Saints defense, the Saints wouldn't be anywhere. The Saints would not be sniffing the playoffs if they didn't play that, if they didn't have that defense. Is the Broncos defense elite? I don't think it's elite, but it's damn good. Now, do they have to have Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes to get to the playoffs and get deep into the playoffs, get deeper into the playoffs? I don't believe so. I do believe they've got to get something done at quarterback. Here's what's scary to me, Colin, about Denver is you got an entire organization that's in flux because it's in trust right now. The Bolin family has the organization in trust. They're trying to sell the franchise, sell the team. So what needs to come first? New ownership, or new management, new head coach, new quarterback, and then go out. I mean, if I'm an owner and I'm going to pay $1 billion for a football team, I want to be able to pick my quarterback and I want to be able to pick my head coach and do all those things. I think that's one of the things that's complicating the Browns or the Broncos situation.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think though, Jeff, because of the way the timelines are going to work on this, the reality is that the Broncos are going to have to appoint a head coach before the ownership situation gets sorted. The ownership situation won't get sorted till the owners meeting in March. Broncos cannot wait until that time. Now, if you're a billionaire, and realistically the price of the Broncos is going to be anywhere from 4 billion to 6 billion, if you pay out that, clearing out a coaching staff or clearing out a front office, that's pockets. Realistically, that's going to be pocket change. If that's what you choose to do, you can do it straight away. Maybe you wait a year. I think it'll be interesting to see. But the franchise will be sold. And I was looking earlier, saw a stat, Jeff, just to say Pat Bowlen never had back-to-back losing seasons, and one of those incredible owners that you had. But from 1974 through 2017, when Vance Joseph came in and the wheels really began to came off, the Broncos only had 4 top 10 picks in the draft from 74 to 2017. They've had 4 top 10 picks in the last 5 years, Jeff. So that tells you what's gone wrong at this franchise. And it's not just a head coach, it's not just a quarterback, it is an ownership void at the top. And that's the reality. You have to have somebody who's in place, who's really there and able to call the shots. And no matter who's in charge of the trust or the job that they're doing, they're not an owner. And I think realistically, that's hurt the Broncos in different ways. Having to play a game last year again, without a QB. Are you telling me that that's happening to Robert Kraft or to Jerry Jones? No, because they're going to be front and center in the media ensuring it isn't. But the reality is that the Broncos are going to have to act. They're going to have to appoint a head coach, and they're going to have to see what happens. But yeah, I think if you're a billionaire, billionaires get to do what billionaires want to do. It will make it interesting, and it might for the really top candidates, Jeff. It might give them pause for thought potentially if they thought, maybe. But you know what? If you give them a big enough contract with enough money, and they think, even if I got pushed out the door, I'll still have 30 million coming my way. I'll take the chance.
Let me tell you something, man. I know pro football. There's a line of guys right now, a line of guys that would love to have that opportunity. Hey, let's take a trip from Denver northeast and go to another city that's looking for a head coach and a general manager now. And that's the Chicago Bears, one of the most storied franchises in all of the NFL. One of the greatest traditions of winning, George Halas, Mike Ditka, the 85 Bears, Dick Butkus, and on and on and on and on. All right. Sid Luckman. I mean, you're talking about a iconic brand, the Chicago Bears. They bring in Matt Nagy to be, quote, the quarterback whisperer because of his success in Kansas City as an assistant for Andy Reid. And he got a lot of credit for developing Pat Mahomes in that redshirt year that Pat had. He can't get it done. Ryan Pace, 7 years as the GM, can't seem to put together an offensive line that can help the quarterback stay alive. They draft Justin Fields. Immediately, he becomes the most important or the most visible and liked sports persona in Chicago, and has by all stretches, he had a disappointing rookie season. Where do the Bears go, in your opinion, Colin, from here?
Well, I think for the Bears, I mean, we were talking about quarterbacks in the Broncos. I mean, the Bears talk about the search for a franchise QB. So when you bring in somebody like Justin Fields and all that potential and all the hype, I don't think Nagy did himself any favors with his handling of that situation. And they also had Nick Foles, and I know there were injuries, but as the saying goes, Jeff, if you've 2 quarterbacks, you've no quarterbacks. Well, the Bears had 3 quarterbacks. And instead of handling it a bit like Nick Sirianni did with the Eagles, where, Jalen Hurts was clearly the number one, even if Gardner Minshew came in and Gardner Minshew played well, and Gardner Minshew accepted that, you just saw all the chopping and changing with Nagy. I have been fortunate. I got to cover the Bears earlier this year, visited Soldier Field, and what a fantastic organization they have there. As you said, totally so storied. So I think for the Bears, though, it's about, you swing and you miss, but then you have to implement a plan and build on the plan and understand that there will be growing pains. And they have to get somebody in now, I suppose, who's going to work with Fields. And when I look at, say, the Bills, I think the Bills are a great example of, they brought, but they didn't have Josh Allen there, but they brought in a team, and they went up. They got their guy in Josh Allen. They understood what his strengths were. They understood what his weaknesses were. And they built around those strengths, Jeff. And look at the results. Look at the way it's paid off for them. So to me, I'm a believer in, the league has changed. You have got to play the rookie QB. You've got to iron out the problems. I mean, realistically, Patrick Mahomes won the MVP in his first year as a starter. Lamar won the MVP in his second year. Joe Burrow is pulling up trees in his second season despite the ACL injury. Josh Allen went to the playoffs in the second year. Jalen Hurts goes to the playoffs in the second year. Davis Mills has had 4 games this year with that Texans roster, and that's not a strong roster yet, and he's had 4 games where he's thrown for more than 300 yards. So the gap between college and the NFL in terms of QBs making the jump, now there'll still be the up and downs, but I think they have got to get a head coach in there who has a plan. It doesn't have to be a QB whisperer. It just has to be a guy who has a plan, who's willing to listen to those around him. Like when you look at, say, the really good coaches, the likes of your Belichick's or BA down in Tampa, he's Leftwich and he has Todd Bowles, and he talks about how he leans on them. They make the play calls. He is there to inspire, to motivate. So to me, for the Bears, it's really about leadership. And with Matt Nagy, what did we see this season, Jeff? We saw him say one day, oh, it's going to be Andy Dalton, and 2 days later he's back at the podium. No, it's going to be Justin Fields. And every week it seemed to be, well, who's the starting QB? I really think that strong leadership, more than X's and O's, is what that Bears team needs.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about those kinds of phenomenon, when you get flip-flopping in the media about who's going to be the guy and all that stuff. Those are usually, in my opinion, those are usually outgrowths of inner conflict in the building, where there's a power struggle going on about a particular player. And typically it's the quarterback, between personnel and coaching. And I've seen it way, way, way too many times. And so I agree with you. In terms of leadership, they need strong general manager. They need a head coach in lockstep with him. And then let's talk about something. This is something that maybe I don't know if you saw, but last week, Olin Kreutz, who's one of the best centers to ever play for the Chicago Bears, and Hawaiian kid, he wanted to get into coaching, much like, many players. A lot of these guys, you can go through around the NFL, and Ron Rivera's same story. Finished his career in Chicago, wanted to become a coach. They made him work for 6 months for no money, right? Olin Kreutz wanted to come back and get, help the organization. They wanted to pay him $15 an hour. And what those things, and talking to Sean Gale, what one of the things that has been a consistent problem with the Bears organization all the way back to when Mike Singletary told me he had to go in and fight for $10,000 as a Pro Bowl middle linebacker that just won a Super Bowl, is that they do not spend money. And, I hate to say this, but if you're not going to spend money, you're going to have a hard time winning in the National Football League.
Yeah, I mean that is the reality, is that you have to have the money, and you have to be prepared to spend it. And when you look at certain teams, I think, Jeff, that can be an area where fans can be a little bit misguided, because the media puts stories out there, and technically it is a fact about how much cap space a team has. But every year there are certain teams that are consistently under the cap. by 10, 15, 20 million year in, year out. And so fans think, oh, next year, and there's always the talk of next year, oh, there's so much cap space, they could do this, they could do this. And it's always chasing your tail, and they'll add to it, and they'll use it next year. And when you have cash rich owners, they can turn contract cash into signing bonuses. That allows you to play with the cap. And there is an art and a skill to that. You've seen the Chiefs do that so well. And so that's where the Bears, it's going to have to be the general manager as well as the head coach that comes in there and that gets creative. I mean, Veach with the Chiefs has done a phenomenal job. I don't know if you remember the story last year that apparently they had $137 at one point to play with in terms of cap space. I think if you, me, and Michael turned out our wallets, we might even have more than that right now. But look at the players that they were able to bring in to sort out their O-line problems. So for the Bears, it's not just the head coach search that they have there, it's also the GM search. And it's appointing the right people and then getting out of their way. I heard you talking with Richard about the Jags and the mess that they have found themselves in. And that's the problem. When you get a head coach decision wrong, that's bad. But when you get a general manager decision wrong, Jeff, that can set your franchise back years. Look at what happened with Bill O'Brien with the Texans. It was an unmitigated disaster, and they are still picking up the pieces, and they will be for a long time. So for the Bears, you're going to have to get somebody in there that's willing to be creative, and then to get that structure in place.
Well, I agree with you. And listen, awesome to get your takes and your expertise on particularly on those Denver Broncos, who you love so much. And again, great to have you on this show. Got to get you back often. And again, keep up the good work with what you guys are doing with the Irish NFL show. Hit the viewers and the listeners right now, Calm, with how they can follow what you guys do at Irish NFL show.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And always delighted to chat to you as well. And you've been a good friend of the Irish NFL show. But viewers can find us. We're across various social media platforms at IRE NFL. On Twitter, we are very active. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube as well. And there's four of us. There's myself, Michael, Brian, and Mark, guys who've been watching the game for decades. I think between the four of us, Jeff, we've about 130 years of watching the NFL. So you'll get plenty of experience, you'll get plenty of debate, discussion, but you won't get a single H in a TH word. So it's all trees and 30 trees. But yeah, we love the interaction. Like you, we love the interaction with fans. So definitely get in touch, and fingers crossed the next season will allow us to do things, more meetups, and maybe a live show that might include your good self.
You know it, man. All you got to do is call, and I'm flying in. Great to have you with us, Calm. Excellent job, and we'll see you again real soon.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Michael, come on out here.
Hello, Jeff. Thanks to Colin as well for coming on. That was good crack.
Colin was great. And as always, you guys, what you four guys do together is really awesome stuff. And I try and catch every episode. So keep doing your thing. Hey, let's get to some questions now. Like, again, from our fans, from our viewers,
Absolutely.
From our listeners. We want to answer what your questions are and take your takes and chew up a little football.
I'm just going to get the Twitter ones in first, Jeff, because they're on the app instead. Just very quickly, put a couple of tweets out there saying about, who do you think might actually win the Super Bowl this year? Few answers here. I'll call them out for a start. Ian in the UK, Bills. There's a lot of different. Actually, it's crazy how many, and it comes down to the business point of the season. There's a lot of questions here. So Dan from Torquay saying Green Bay win it for me. Rodgers win it one more time before he moves to Denver. I hope so. Chris Johnson, hard to see past the Packers at Lambeau Field. but Lord knows who's coming out of the AFC. Green Bay this time. Simon Povey in the UK. I think this is the most open it has been in donkey's years. Anybody can beat anybody. I'm going for the Bengals. Dave Hutt in the UK says Green Bay. They seem the most erratic of the contenders and have the players coming back. Nick Steger, who is in Teignmouth in England. I've got that correct. Green Bay over Buffalo in a shootout. Brenda Thompson, I think, is in the UK. The Falcons. Oh no! Oh wait, done again already. There's a lot of comments here. Rupert Diggins is suggesting he's in Hayward's Heath, suggesting the Bengals might win at 41-35. 80-yard touchdown over the Bengals from Jamar Chase. Richard Moorcroft, Chiefs to beat Packers. Ian Wiley, as I said the Bills. Wee Badger, who's in the UK, I think the Bills winning it to beat the Patriots. Carl Rast, I think, is from Newcastle, or he's a Newcastle fan. Dallas Cowboys all the way. Steve Oxborough, Packers. And finally, Paul Knight, 49ers. Nobody said the Steelers.
It's amazing. And I can get that one. But one 49er guy, it seems to be the general consensus amongst the tribe is that it's going to be the Packers. I am shocked that there has not been a Dallas Cowboys sighting. Fred Flunk must not be watching the show because
he is. There's loads of comments, man. There's loads. It's
all right.
Kashif is saying, hey, he said a few things there about the Cowboys. David Wallace, I know Richard was saying about it. He mentioned what you said about Dan Quinn, Kyle Shanahan going up again there. Loads of different comments. Fred Flunk is here. He says, Coach, has Kellen Moore done enough to earn a shot as head coach? I don't think he has, Jeff.
Well, this is a really interesting one for me because I can remember Kellen Moore when we're playing at the University of Hawaii and we go to Boise State to play on the blue turf at Boise State. And there's this scrawny, left-handed kid playing quarterback, and he took his helmet off, and he looked like he was in the 6th grade. I swear to God. I said, who is that? And they said, oh, that's the quarterback. I said, what's his name? They said, Kellen Moore. And he proceeded to dice us up that day. And what I see him as a play caller is the same thing I saw as a quarterback at Boise State. Really smart, made great decisions, understood the game. I think he's done enough to get a shot as a head coach because offensive coaches are always, particularly coordinators, are always going to get a chance if you have success. And I think so if you're a young coach, you want to coach on offense and you want to be a quarterback guy and then become an offensive coordinator, that's how you're going to get a head coaching job easiest. But certainly, I think Kellen Moore is going to be interviewed multiple times in this cycle. It's just going to come down to him having the right fit. And then Jerry's going to make it tough on him to go. I'm going to tell you that right now because I've seen him do it before. He did it with my friend Jason Garrett, where, Miami wanted to hire Jason, and he basically bought him back and made him the head coach in waiting for his last years in Dallas before he fired Wade and made him the head coach. So I think Kellen is one of the hot guys in this hiring cycle. Throw me another one.
I like what you say there. I can see him staying in Dallas and waiting for that eventual position opening up. I think he's been there that long already, so go for it. Right, let's have a look here. Ricky Beadle, here's some Steelers stuff. Man, what a win for the Steelers the weekend. Seriously. Huge. UK Steelers fan, 2 questions. Let's see if we can get one in here. Harris is a stud, most touches in the NFL, 0 fumbles, but surely they're just running the legs off the man before we even get a good O-line. I actually think, Jeff, I don't want to give anything away here. If you look at the way that they played against Baltimore, if they use Najee Harris effectively in Arrowhead at the weekend,
Stop it!
No, but I'm just putting
Stop it! No. Let me say it better. Hell no.
Really?
No. 15 points. I'm just telling you, Najee Harris is a great football player. And I saw that statistic today that he had more touches than anybody else in the NFL, 318, I think it was. It was over 300. And my tweet back was, damn, get that brother an ice pack, right? because that's a lot of touches as a running back. You're getting hit all the time. It's not like a receiver can get a touch, catch the ball, and step out of bounds and not get hit, right? Running back's getting whacked on every play. But Najee Harris is a tough guy. And somebody, it might have been Ricky, actually asked the question of, are they using him too much? My reaction was this: hey, this is the National Football League, not for long league, right? It's not long for anybody. And if you got a horse, you ride that horse. I mean, it's the same thing we see in Tennessee, right? With the King, they're going to hand the ball off to him until he can't. They did it with Earl Campbell. Is it the right thing? I don't know, but I'm telling you, it's what's going to happen, because you're going to give the ball to the guy that gives you the best chance to win football games.
We've got a tweet basically asking for questions. I'll get through that, and then we'll get you out of here, Jeff. And I know you're a busy man and you want to watch Coronation Street, yeah, on the TV. Well, here, first off, Jeff, congratulations on this new gig. You kept it very quiet. I had no idea. I was like, what? I would have been like the Schefter situation, per source, Jeff Reinebold to sign with Montreal. I would have done it. I would have put a whole thing out. But seriously, congratulations. Terry O'Malley, who's in Montreal, has said, hey, Jeff, firstly, welcome back to MTL. On what island/city is your Hawaii home? We visited Maui and
Maui.
OAHU a few years back. Amazing place. I can't pronounce it.
You know what, Terry? I live on the Big Island. It is. I am one island away from Maui. You can, as a matter of fact, on a clear day on the west coast of our island, you can see Maui. I live on the East Coast, and it is the biggest island of the chain, and not very well populated. I live in a very rustic, rural, jungle place, and it's a tremendous place. So if anybody's ever on the Big Island, make sure you call me, because I always
you've got Wi-Fi now, Jeff, so it's all good.
Yeah, I do have Wi-Fi now. We were like in third world jungle, man, because we didn't even have Wi-Fi for a while. So, but we do have Wi-Fi now, so you can get me. So anytime the tribe wants to come out to the house, you're more than welcome.
That was an incredible off season. Almost done, Jeff. Daniel, who is in, I think he's in the UK, says predictions this weekend. I'm going to put you on the spot. Have you any bold prediction that you want to make here, or are you going to save it for a few days?
Well, I'm gonna go right back to where we were just at, Michael, and that's your somehow believing that the Steelers have a chance.
I don't. I'm
against
just
Kansas City.
I'm starting to think. I think there will be an upset this week, a big upset this weekend. But if you look at the average of how Kansas City have played in some games, and you got Ben Roethlisberger, you got that adrenaline potential final game, Najee Harris, TJ Watt, everything there. It's just, surely there's a chance. I mean, but at the end of the day, you have a chance when the game starts and it's 0-0. You never know. But I know you probably don't want to give it away yet, but can you see there being a big upset this weekend, even without giving it away?
All right, let's. I'm going to tell you exactly what my father told me one time. Son, you got two chances, Slim and none. And Slim just left town. So that's how I feel about that. And I have tremendous respect for that Pittsburgh defense. I mean, I really do. But let's face it, Baltimore was beat up, and I mean beat up on defense. And Pittsburgh had to struggle to beat them, and they were playing the backup quarterback, right? I mean, that was a mash unit playing for Baltimore, and the Steelers barely snuck out of there. Kansas City is a good football team. Now, I'm a little concerned about Kansas City's health right now too, because Kelsey, I watching the game, he's got a lower
hobbled
body
off
thing.
in Denver. He hobbled off, man, in Denver.
Yeah, and Tyreek's got a issue with his heel. So, but in the end, it comes down to quarterbacks, particularly in playoff football. And Big Ben will be a Hall of Famer, and he deserves to be. But there's what the Big Ben we are seeing today is not the Big Ben that hung Hall of Fame numbers. So, no. I think that the Cowboy-Niner game is going to be a great football game, and I mean a great football game. And
I'm excited.
Talked to Richard about that. The Raiders and the Bengals. Do I think the Raiders can win in Cincinnati? Yeah, I do. But right now, the thing that Cincinnati has is that ability to score points. They really got after Kansas City, and Burrow's playing with a lot of confidence. Jamar Chase is, I don't know how you deal with that guy. And they can run the ball a little bit. Their defense is opportunistic. Hendrickson's been a revelation for them. So that's going to be a great game. I think Philadelphia will get blown out, or potentially could get blown out. I think that, another game I think is going to be interesting. I'm going to watch the Bills and the Patriots. Yeah, I think that's going to be a great football game.
Billy.
You like the Bills?
Big time. I just let's do a wild card special this week sometime. Yeah.
All right. You call it to ask the fan. Let's put it out as a fan question. When do you want to do it? We can do it Saturday morning before we go to Sky. We can do it Friday. We can do it whenever you guys want to do it. I know you got a busy schedule. You got all kinds of things going on. You got 9 million things you're doing. It's hard to get you in.
Our show is on.
I remember, Mike, when you used to love football, when you really loved football.
No, I just can't wait for you and the draft previews in March. Big Spence. We have our show, I think, on Friday night, and that's going to cover all the weekend's games. So you're more than welcome in that there. Maybe we could do something before that on Friday and get that going. You guys are in the studio Saturday, Sunday, yeah? Is that the plan?
Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, I understand. So actually, I think we're going to have 3 games, and this is the baton death march of broadcasting, because we are tired on that final game.
But it's going back to the old days where you, Kevin, and Neil, where you were sitting up to 5:30 in the morning just talking, answering. That was the good old days. So do that, and I'll happily watch, Jeff.
Hey man, I tell you, it's awesome having you. I hope you get healed up from whatever's ailing you, and let's go. Oh, we got a vote in right here. Ricky says Friday evening. All right, Rick, you're on charge. Good. You get it organized. Get the tribe organized. We're going Friday evening.
Fantastic, Jeff, to see the amount of people interacting tonight, both on Twitter from replying and on the live. I'll see you then on Friday. Yeah.
All right. Aloha, everybody.